Okay, that brings us to 5.3, which is, speaking of not having enough money for anything ever, 5.3, preliminary budget, fiscal year 2017-18. And I think we can keep going for now. And Dave Executive Director of Finance, is that your official title, Dave? Dave Montoya is here to present this information to us. Keep in mind that as we are going into the last, I believe, 12 days or thereabouts of our state legislative session, that the financial landscape is changing, sometimes on a daily basis. There are still things that are up in the air. So Dave is going to give us his best prognostication of what is to come. So thank you for being here tonight with that. Dave.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And yes, tonight I am here to present the preliminary budget for the school district. Now, we've been talking about budget often the last multiple board meetings, so tonight I'm not going to do that again because I think we've already done it 3 times as far as what the state of the state is. So tonight what I really want to do is focus on what the preliminary budget is, what assumptions we've used to build it, and to President Kipp's point, some of this is our best thinking at this time, so understand the preliminary budget really is a draft budget, and that's really my first bullet point on the first slide, is that the preliminary budget is in draft form, and that doesn't mean that we're asking the board to approve it tonight. We're not asking them to adopt it. What this is our opportunity to say all the work that we've been putting in since November, when the governor first released his budget announcement at the state level, all the work that we've been putting into assumptions and gathering data to build the budget for next year is in draft form at this point. So this is the first time during the process where we really put pen to paper, or I guess toner cartridge to paper nowadays, and actually print out the budget and say, here's the line items and here's what makes it up. So it goes beyond just assumptions that we've been using up to this point. The draft will continue to be revised as new information becomes available. I was a little concerned as I was putting this budget presentation together that we wouldn't have a finance legislation to talk about. The School Finance Act was released, although it has not been finalized. So there's still opportunity for changes in this budget. I want to re-emphasize that with everybody that's watching or in the audience, that again, it's draft and there's still opportunity for change. Although right now, we're not sensing that there may be much change to the budget. So it may be that there's not much change when we bring it back in May. But if there is change, we will let people know about that as soon as possible. Yes, we're bringing the draft forward today. This gives not only the Board of Education an opportunity, but the community itself to take a look at that budget and to not feel like they have to ask all questions tonight. But if there's questions that come forward in the next month, we have opportunity for that to happen, because we won't be presenting the proposed budget until May 23rd, which is really a month later from here. So I want to hit a couple key elements in the budget tonight. The first one is, and you may recall from our budget focus areas, one of my biggest concerns was getting our unassigned reserve back into a place where the district can be comfortable and understand that it's protected, especially as we go into these uncertain times. So reserves are what allows us to do this. And for those that are watching at home or in the audience, reserves are simply, think about it as your savings account. So, you know, you have your checking your checking account where your paycheck may get deposited. You spend that on your day-to-day operations. Your savings account is really intended for unforeseen events, and that's what we're talking about here is our reserve account. And as you can see and I took a snippet out of the actual budget document here, but on line 68, you can see that the unassigned appropriated reserve is what we're really talking about here. And we have a fund balance policy called DBAA, and it's general fund balances. That's the name of the policy. And what that policy does is it requires us to maintain a savings account or reserve account between 3 and 5%. Beginning the last year, we had talked about that the reserve balances were dropping significantly lower because of a budget variance we had. We did do some stopgaps to mitigate that drop in that year. But as we move forward into this year, we were again caught off guard by a decline in our October count projection. of which we talked a lot about in January when we did the revised budget. But that really cost us about just under $3 million, that October count adjustment. You can see that moving from line 68 from the left-hand column to the right, to just barely to the right. And you can see that our reserve balance dropped down to about 0.2%. We've been making many efforts, and I know you can't see the titles at the top of this, but the third column over is our estimate for the end of this year. So our budget in January was predicting about $600,000 in reserve, of which is a far cry from the 3 to 5% that's required. But as a result of our carryover sweep process that we did, I'm pleased to say that we can report that at the end of this fiscal year, our reserve balance will be up close to about $4.9 million. Obviously, this is given with the large caveat that nothing happens unforeseen between tonight and the end of the fiscal year. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. But we have been able to move our reserve balance up. And then into the next fiscal year, and what's displayed in the budget, we have two other mechanisms that are increasing that reserve balance. One is the Board of Education is going to consider reducing their contingency reserve from 2% to 1%. And you can see that on the line right above it, on line 67. You see that dropping from 4.8 in the third column down to about 2.4 in the last column. The other piece is that in this budget we also plan on collecting some of our mill levy override from 2016 that was authorized by the voters in November. We want to thank the voters for that generous support, because it will be needed in the budget coming forward, not only this next cycle but the years to come as we go into our growth, as we continue with growth in the district. But the plan here is that we will be collecting that override. Some of that override will be shared on a pro rata basis with our district charter schools. But the portion that is not shared with the charter schools will be retained and will flow into unspent, and conversely will flow into unassigned reserve. So a combination of all of what I just talked about is what's really bringing our reserve balance up from the revised budget of $600,000 all the way up to the $9 million that we are displaying in the preliminary budget tonight for 2017-18. So now let's talk about a couple of the items that are in the budget, that are assumptions that are important for the board to understand, because assumptions are where we can go wrong with budget. For example, we know the inflation rate, so that one's not going to change on us, and the inflation rate as of February 2017 was 2.8%. That's important because the base funding in the school finance formula increases by the inflationary rate, of which gives us a very large portion of our revenue. The other component, or the other key assumption in the total program funding formula for the state, is number of kids. And so in here you can see that we have reduced our projected count quite a bit here to be conservative as a result of what happened last October count. So right now in the budget for non-charter schools, we're projecting about a 0.35% increase, which is quite a bit lower than the historical trend that we have been tracking for the last number of years at about 1.5%. So again, I hope you see a trend that we're trying to be somewhat conservative here, but we also don't want to arbitrarily make that number zero for no reason. We're not to that point yet. Other key points in the budget are that the School Finance Act was released, so I was able to put this slide in before it came to the board, and that is referred to as Senate Bill 2017-296. So if you're interested in reading the bill, you can go out onto the General Assembly website and pull that bill off the website and read it. Sometimes that bill is 40, 50 pages this round, or at least in the state it is now. Keep in mind that bill is in draft form too. It's only 3 pages. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing earth-shattering in there, or nothing that we did not expect. In fact, we had, since the governor had predicted or proposed a negative factor increase of $50 million back in November, that's exactly what's happened in the School Finance Act, and in fact it's like 48.1. We're calling it 50 million on the slide here. And as we look at the data that CDE just released, we can see that the CDE is projecting that that per pupil amount for our district would be $7,223 per student, of which I'm very pleased to say that as Brett and I were working on the budget this round, that is literally probably 30 cents off of what we were projecting, so that's good. And we're hoping that since the School Finance Act is in draft, maybe we'll see some change there, but again, we're not budgeting for it because I don't know that it'll come to fruition. The last piece I already had alluded to is that we did include the $2.6 million from the 2016 override. Voters at home may be thinking, hey, wait a minute, I passed an $8 million override, why are you only collecting 2.6? One of our commitments to the voters was that we would phase this in and scale it up as assessed valuation grows. So we're holding to that commitment, and it also is a commitment that we published in our Tabor notice. So we are holding to both those commitments.
Dave?
Yes.
Could you just go back?
Yes.
I just wanted to stress again that our funded pupil growth that we're basing this budget on is a net amount. We have some schools
Yes,
that are
thank you.
growing much more than that, and we have others that are shrinking slightly, so that's the net.
Yes, and that's a very important concept, and I appreciate you pausing me on that, because one of the things that we're hearing, and we just got done sitting with every school over the last 2 weeks reviewing their plans for the coming budget, and that's really looking at their staffing plans and their budget plans. And one of the things we did notice is a number of schools are reducing some staff, and it really is a result of what Dr. Smyser is talking about here, is that this net growth is net, and that means that some schools are growing. If you think about like Wellington Middle School, they're growing quite a bit, whereas some other schools aren't growing near as fast or maybe declining even in this projection. So that dynamic is going on in the district, and it's a dynamic we do experience every year, although it does seem a little more profound this year because we missed the October count projection so greatly last year. This next chart, I just put in there because I've done it multiple years, and it kind of does tell a little story. This is a comparison of the inflation rate, of which I just said that our per pupil amount should be increasing by. Back in 2011, we used to actually get another 1% from Amendment 23. That phased out beginning fiscal year 2012. But really why I put this chart in the packet is the column in the middle with all the brackets around it. That's called the negative factor, and what this shows is the discrepancy between where our per pupil revenue should be versus where it is in reality. And the takeaway here that when I presented this last year, I said with some optimism, our per pupil amount is dropping, so they're slowly eroding the negative factor. Well, you can see in the fiscal year 2018, I can't say that anymore because the negative factor has increased by quite a bit here, up to 962 per student as opposed to 916 in the current school year. So we're seeing that trend go the other direction, and again, I promised I wouldn't go through all the state budget woes again because we've done that multiple times, but I think this is our first indication that this is coming, and so I think we've adequately got our eyes on it. Now I want to talk about the key assumptions in the budget, and then after that we'll be able to take some questions. First, because we do have some growth at some sites and in our key instructional areas like integrated services and English language support, we do have about $360,000 in this budget. So as I'm going through these pieces, this is a really important piece to understand. I'll tell you everything that's built up, and then there's a line in the presentation, and what that line represents is what anything that comes after that has not been built into the budget. So the budget you have in your packet already includes growth of $360,000 for student-based budgeting, alternative campuses, integrated services, and English language learners. This number is usually a lot bigger, but because our growth rate is compressed, you're seeing that this budget need is also compressed. Also built into the budget in your packet tonight is the statutory para contribution increase that we are planning, or not planning, but we know is coming next January. And right now that cost is estimated to be just about 0.7 or $700,000, 0.7 million or 700,000. Also built into this budget is our current allocations to charter schools based on the information we have. We've gotten 3 out of the 4 budgets back from all charter schools. We'll be getting the other one soon, and we'll be able to incorporate all of that data, growth data, into the budget. Right now, we've got about 75% of it built into the budget that's in your packet. The increase here is a combination of multiple things. One is You'll remember that I talked about the per pupil amount we're getting per kid increase, so the charter school allocations increase by the same amount. They get some of that. Charter schools are also growing slightly. I think that the budgets that we've got in indicate a growth of about 40 kids next year amongst the 3 charter schools that we've got budgets on. And then the final piece is, and again, I'm going to mention this twice, is that there is some mill levy override from the 2016 override that is flowing through the charter schools. That's what's making up that $0.9 million increase for charter school contributions, or not contributions, but allocations. Also built into the budget tonight is $700,000 for health and dental. And that represents a 5% increase. Now, keep in mind, I emphasized multiple times this is draft budget. We are getting information. We just received information from Benefits Committee that we may need to increase that up to about 7% to keep up with where we see claims coming and what the actuarial analysis that our third-party administrator Mercer has done for us is indicating that we may need to increase that a little bit beyond the 5%. So we're having conversations about that now, but I wanted to make you aware of it in this presentation because it has not been adjusted in the budget tonight. Only the 5% is contemplated in the budget that you have in your packet. We have also in the budget that you have tonight have included $1 million for retirement differential. This is a reduction in cost. This has been scaled down from the $1.4 million that we were projecting earlier. Plain and simple, our retirements are not coming in as strong as we have seen historically, although there are some that continue to slip in, so I'll continue to monitor that as we move forward, but at this point I am not comfortable including a $1.4 million reduction of cost for retirement differential because of what we're seeing. Just some slight drag on our retirements. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That means people want to stay here. That's good. So so that's in there. Also included in this budget tonight, and I'm sorry I keep saying that, but I really want to emphasize what's in and what's not. Tonight we have also included the $800,000 in reduction in cost at the central level that we have put forward. And I know Dr. Smizer sent out an email that has more detail on this. I want to just hit the high points of that detail that went out to staff. 7.5 FTE is what's been identified as reductions, along with operating budget reductions, totaling that total of about $0.8 million. And again, that has been built into the budget tonight. Okay, so all those assumptions that I ran through extremely quickly bring us to the purpose of this preliminary budget is to put ink to paper, or spreadsheet, I guess, in electronic form, and to plug in all the assumptions that we've been gathering up, looking at all the revenue, and identifying how close were we with our projections. And in here, for some of the reasons that I talked about, the retirement differential and changes in the, I can't remember what the other one is now, retirement differential and the reduction in central costs, we have identified about $5.3 million available to spend within the budget. So if you look at the actual preliminary budget, there is a line item in there that says resources available to spend or something like that. And that really represents the unspent balance that we do plan on spending. And this is where we cross the line. And these are the things that have not been built into the budget. So we have not built into the budget increases for licensed lane changes and the equivalent that would be provided for classified and administrators for market adjustments. That cost is about $1.1 million. We also have not built in $3.8 million cost for licensed step and an equivalent for classified administrators for range movement, so just the difference in how those schedules flow and different terminology. And we have not considered or built in anything for a cost of living adjustment or a COLA. For reference, every 1% COLA does cost about $1.6 million. So this slide is pretty telling as to where we're at with the budget and what decisions we have coming forward. You can see that we can't accomplish all 3 of those with the resources that are available. So we will have to come up with a way to identify how we want to treat all 3 of these categories that is fiscally prudent within the budget, and we are discussing some of those options currently in negotiations as we speak.
As we as we look at making commitments for next year too, we're also jointly talking about how do we manage enrollment projections, since that's such a key element in our capacity. So we are looking at ways of managing when will we know how many kids we actually got. So.
Right, exactly. So, do want to bring our attention back to our focus areas for budget. These are really our budget priorities. The biggest one here is I am relieved that our unassigned reserve has been restored to an acceptable level. I may get a little bit more sleep now. Maybe not total sleep yet, but I'm getting more sleep. Equity and achievement. The next ones are really areas that typically when we have budget priorities, they are areas where you might focus or add additional resources. Given the budget in this round and probably rounds to come in future years, these may be pointers more at where we do not want to reduce as opposed to where are we adding, because we may be going into multiple years of budget reductions as the state realizes that they can't maintain K-12 education the way it's currently functioning. And so these are areas like equity and achievement gaps, social and emotional well-being, post-secondary support, effective use of educational technology. These are areas that we will want to avoid as we do our budget reductions. So that's a good way to think about those. We also need to be mindful of long-range planning. Dr. Smyser just mentioned that, and also maintaining competitive salaries and benefits, because that's what brings good teachers to Poudre School District. Well, that and that Poudre School District's a great place to work. But being competitive is also a part of it, because people want to earn a wage when they're working. So. Budget process timeline, we are moving very close to the May timeline, of which is where we're finalizing items. Budget Advisory Committee will be meeting again, I believe it's toward the end of May. I think we might even have another one snuck in there sometime soon. We will be meeting with negotiations. That's probably the next big step in the budget process here. And pending a final conclusion to employee negotiations and final School Finance Act, we will be able to hopefully at that point present a balanced budget to the board to consider for adoption in June. That would happen in May, at the May work session when that happens. So again, here's our timeline. I've put a little green arrow to indicate where we're at through the process. And yes, the preliminary budget is really our chance to submit a draft with all of our information, all the data we've collected up to this point. But we will be modifying that draft over the next 30 days or so to reflect what's happening. And again, the board is required to adopt a budget before June 30th, before the next fiscal year begins. Questions?
Rob?
So a couple of things on the preliminary budget. If I'm doing my math right, and we need to go from 5% to 7% increase for the health and dental stuff, we're talking probably another $250,000 off the top of the funds, quote, available for these other activities. Is that
I believe about a quarter or 300,000 is probably what we're looking at.
Somewhere in that ballpark? Okay.
In fact, Brett Parsons, our budget director, will be helping me. He's in the audience tonight. We're going to be looking at that. We started looking at that a lot closer than we ever have to see how tight we can get that budget. And so we'll be looking at that, trying to get as much mileage as we can. But right now, I'm thinking your thoughts are about right.
Okay, and if Senate Bill 61 passes, which is, just to remind folks in the audience, would require us to share all mill levies that we have passed, whether or not the schools were in existence at the time, with the charter schools. That would take additional funds out of this available $5.3 million, probably starting next year. I understand there are some variations on the bill about phasing
Correct.
it in and all this kind of thing, but conceptually, that'll reduce this number even further, because we'll
Yes.
have to take money that we had not expected to share with the charter schools. And by the way, for those of you on camera, we do share mill levy with our charter schools based on when the mill levy was passed and when the charter schools were in existence.
And it's mill levy overrides. which
Yes,
is different.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. Mill levy overrides, you're right. But the proposed law would require us to share all mill levy overrides with charter schools, which would have a negative effect on our budget.
That's absolutely correct, and if it were fully implemented immediately, that reduction could be about $1.5 million based on our current estimates.
Okay.
You had talked about that there's different variants or changes in the bill. They're talking about the way it is drafted now, talking about a 3-year phase-in, so that could be a $500,000 one year, another $500,000 the next, until
Still.
we get to the full 1.5 in the current draft that it is.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess the only other thing I wanted to, and I know you said you weren't going to go into the state stuff again, but back on the preliminary budget key assumptions revenue thing that shows the negative factor growing again.
Yes.
Our current, and if nothing changes, our current anticipation is that negative factor is going to continue to grow until it hits some, like, really bigger number, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have any sense about what that number will be?
Well,
I mean, so if we take out all the factors, how?
sure.
that
So,
would
so
be the
in
number, right?
today's budget, the 17-18 budget, the school year we're in, or no, we're not in that one. Sorry, forgot what year I'm in. Sorry, I got
16,
multiple
17.
years in my. I got multiple years in the
Sure.
budget right now.
I
So,
understand.
so the current school year we're in right now, if we were to strip all the factors out of the school finance formula, of which some are projecting that will happen over time, that would equate to about $18 million for Poudre School District in current dollars.
Right, and on a per student basis, which is what you have on this slide, do you know what that turns into?
I don't know off the
Fine,
top of my head.
okay.
And I don't want to do that math in my head. That's dangerous.
All right, thanks, I appreciate it. I just wanted to make sure that folks continue to understand that number, whether you do it on a per student basis or on a all students basis, is going to continue to get bigger and impact our ability to meet those objectives back on the other slide that you had.
Correct. Yes. And again, that's a good emphasis that this is a draft budget at this point, and there still can be changes, whether they be things that we decide locally or they're things that are decided for us at the state level.
From your legislative work, do you have anybody have any sense of where that charter one is going to go in terms of timing? If it were to pass, is it likely that it'll be a phase-in, or any way of reading the tea leaves on that one?
It would probably be a phase-in based on the amendment that went through the state senate. However, right now we don't know which committee the House will assign it to. It's been introduced in the House, and it's probably one of the 2 or 3 most contentious bills out there right now.
Yes.
And it's an example of a bill that's not just contentious in and of itself, but the implementation is critical for every district in the state, almost anyway. So,
Correct.
So we'll keep tuned.
Yeah. And just while we're on the topic of the charter schools, many of the large districts, the CFOs were kind of exchanging emails, comparing notes. How much is your district? How much is your district? We're all in about the same boat. I mean, there's variances from district to district, obviously, but everybody's looking at some percentage.
Yes, back to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Other board member questions? I guess I would like to point out something really cool the district's done in the last couple weeks. If you go onto the main psdschools.org website and you go under Focus Projects and you click on School Finance 101, you will find the most awesome video ever. Thank you to our communications team. Oh, Dave's going to show.
I'm going to try to pull it up as
And
you're
right
talking.
under that is a fact sheet about school finance in Colorado, and I believe that's the one I saw for the first time on Thursday morning that our communications team put together, which totally blew me away. So thank you to our communications team, because, so here's the thing. The Colorado School Finance Institute recently did a survey of what people thought Tabor was. Most people think it's a shopping center in Denver, okay? Most people do not get the implications that that has on our budgets and on our everyday lives. And if anybody wants to talk school finance, I'm always more than happy to sit down and talk with anybody about it. Yeah, so there he is under Focus Projects on the main page on School Finance 101. If you click on that, it's a seriously worth the 2-minute and 10-second investment to go watch that video because it puts it very clearly. It explains not only how our schools and PSD are financed, but how we as a district spend the money. Okay, and then that little blue thing right underneath it is a nice little printable sheet that you can print out and share with people, because it really does a good job of encapsulating a lot of information in a small amount of space. So thank you so much to our communications folks for putting that together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing. The other thing I'd like to say is thank you to Sarah Jane Kyle in the back there, who's been doing a nice series on school finance. There's a lot of good information there. I had somebody ask me just today about, well, you know, we're getting that marijuana money now, right? So I was able to refer them to Sarah Jane's article that she did just like the other week in the Coloradoan, explaining, oh, and it's linked to, I'm being told, on our that page that we were just on. So there's a lot of good information there, and really what we are in the process of doing, we have to be, is educating people, since somehow we have turned into, instead of a Republican form of government where taxes are concerned, we are now a direct democracy. So it involves educating every single voter in the state if we're going to figure out how to fund schools adequately. So anyway, thank you to everybody who's had a hand in helping to do that. And this is some work that I know many of us on the board are interested in continuing, because it's incredibly important in how we educate our next generation. You look like you want to say something, Rob.
Yeah, and I know that our focus obviously is education as the Board of Education, but I'll just tag on what you said. It's going to be an issue of funding, generally funding services in the state, including transportation and other kind of services, pretty soon. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with that as a state. We're either going to accept less, or we're going to have to find some way to pay more, frankly. So, you know.
Because ultimately, it's not right that we have the #1 economy in Colorado right at the moment, and we cannot adequately fund education.